My 16-year-old son spent 4 straight days building a stage in our backyard for his grandfather's 70th birthday. He barely slept, barely ate, and every night I heard the hammering of nails and the scratch of his pencil as he rewrote scenes for the little play he wanted to perform. The morning of the party, when the chairs were lined up, the lights strung like stars across the fence, and the cake was waiting on the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother. No punctuation, no apology, just 12 words that hit harder than a fist. We move the party to the country club. Adults only. Don't come. At first I thought it was a joke. I stared at the screen, reading it again and again, waiting for a follow-up that never came. When I called, his voice was calm, almost bored. It's just easier this way. You know how Ethan gets carried away. We didn't want to embarrass Dad on his big day. I turned around, and there was Ethan standing in the doorway, his hands still covered in sawdust. His face, God, I'll never forget his face. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just looked at me, then at the stage he'd built with his own 2 hands, and whispered, "Gwes, I'll just burn it." That moment broke something in me. Because I knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't just talking about wood and nails. He was talking about every ounce of belief he had in himself. But here's the thing. I wasn't about to let my son's light be snuffed out by people who couldn't see it. Not again. Not this time. So no, I didn't beg. I didn't drive to the country club and demand a seat at their perfect little table. Instead, I picked up my phone and did something else. Something they never expected. And 12 hours later, there were cars lining up outside our house, strangers filling our backyard, and a journalist with a camera whispering words I'll remember for the rest of my life. But it wasn't just the applause, or the article, or the standing ovation that shook our family to its core. It was what happened after, what they did, and how far I had to go to protect my son, because by the end of the night, the police were at my door. Melissa Carter never thought her life would revolve around scraps of plywood, thrift, store string lights, and a dream far too big to fit in the backyard of a rented house in Portland. Yet that was exactly where she found herself in the last week of June, watching her 16-year-old son, Ethan Carter, hammer the final nails into the wooden frame he proudly called his stage. Melissa was a high school art teacher, a single mom just strong enough to keep life moving forward, yet just tired enough to know no one else would catch her if she fell. People often praised her gentle eyes, her calming smile that could steady even the most restless student. But few ever noticed the deep lines etched around her mouth, the kind carved after years of swallowing the feeling that, in her own family's eyes, she would never be enough. Ethan, on the other hand, was nothing like the mold her side of the family worshipped. While his cousins were taking SAT prep courses by 10th grade, carefully polishing their RA summaes for Ivy League applications, Ethan spent hours buried in books on stage design, sketching out dreamlike sets, and transforming his bedroom into a makeshift experimental studio. He didn't dream of becoming a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. He dreamed of becoming a stage director. And to Melissa's wealthy, status-driven relatives, the ones living in marble, floored houses out in the suburbs, that dream was nothing short of a punchline. Since Ethan was little, they had dismissed him. At family gatherings, they would pat his head and say, "You're smart, but you need to be more practical." Or worse, they'd turn to Melissa and sigh, "He's too much of a dreamer. You should steer him toward something real, something stable." That phrase, "something real," played on repeat in Melissa's head like a cruel refrain, haunting her for years. But Ethan was stubborn in a quiet way. He never shouted, never rebelled with tantrums. He simply kept doing the work. And when his grandfather, a kind man who often yielded to his domineering wife and eldest daughter, was about to turn 70, Ethan made a proposal. Not a country club banquet, not an overpriced dinner with fixed menus and hollow laughter. He wanted to stage a mini Broadway in the backyard, complete with a script, lights, music, all designed and built by him and a handful of friends. When Ethan spoke about it, his eyes lit up, his hands moving wildly as he described every detail. Melissa sat there watching her tall, wary son, hair falling messily across his forehead, and suddenly saw herself at 16. Once branded an outsider, once daring to dream of a life that didn't match anyone else's script. But unlike her younger self, Ethan wasn't asking permission to dream. He was declaring it. He was doing it. In the days that followed, the backyard turned into a construction site. The sound of hammering echoed from morning until late at night. Extension cords ran across the grass, old fabric was dyed into makeshift backdrops, and thrifted string lights slowly transformed the space into something magical. Every evening, when Melissa came home from work, Ethan would drag her outside, proudly pointing out each new detail, a fox doorway suggesting New York City streets, a hand-painted sign in silver that read, "The Carter Stage." Melissa didn't need anyone to tell her. She knew her son had poured his entire heart into this project, and she also knew the very people Ethan wanted most to impress, her own family, would likely be the last to recognize his talent. But Ethan didn't seem to care about their doubt. He just said one thing, voice trembling but steady. "I just want Grandpa to see what I'm really good at. Just once, Mom, I only need once." Melissa nodded, her chest tightening, and in that moment she made a silent promise. If they turned their backs on him this time, her son would not have to fall alone. In the days that followed, the backyard of their little rental house in Portland became an entirely different world. It was no longer just a patch of patchy grass, an old wooden chair, and a rusted fence. Under Ethan's hands and his boundless imagination, it slowly transformed into a stage, where light and dreams wove themselves together. In the mornings, as Melissa got ready for work, she often found her son sitting cross-legged among piles of lumber, brows furrowed, pencil racing across sheets of paper. Sometimes he chuckled to himself, scribbling something out, then sketching again, as if 1,000 scenes were running through his head at once. By the afternoons, neighborhood friends drifted over, not all of them handy, but eager to help him hang fabric, string lights, or simply laugh as Ethan directed them with the authority of a true stage director. Ethan worked with a focus Melissa had never seen in any teenager. He tested each bulb of the string lights, swapping them in and out until the glow was just right. Warm golden, Broadway enough, as he put it. He pulled out old curtains from the storage shed, dipped them in dye, and hung them across the fence like sails. When the wind blew, the fabric rippled and swayed, creating a backdrop so delicate that Melissa felt a shiver run through her. She knew then, any audience who sat down at that party would feel something far beyond a 16-year-old's effort. In the kitchen, Melissa found herself drawn into the orbit of his dream. She wasn't much of a cook, but she baked, prepared little side dishes, anything that might support the show. Ethan had even designed a menu: mint lemonade, star-shaped cookies, a few light bites. Nothing fancy, but every detail carried his touch. One afternoon, he told her with sparkling eyes, "The audience can't just watch, Mom. They need to taste it, smell it, feel it." Melissa smiled, her heart twisting, because she knew those words weren't just childish play. They were the manifesto of an artist. Every day after work, Melissa heard music spilling from the backyard. Ethan blasted show tunes, adjusting the speakers, singing along, then cutting the tracks short to rehearse lines with his friends. He assigned roles, blocked scenes, fine-tuned gestures. And on some nights, when Melissa glanced out the window, she saw him alone on that little stage, arms stretched high, lips moving as though he were already standing before a packed theater. The golden light of the bulbs washed over his face, and in that instant, Melissa saw a different Ethan, not the boy dismissed by relatives, but a young man ready to step into the world on his own terms. Each morning, Ethan woke her with questions. "Do you think the seats are comfortable enough? Will Grandpa see the stage clearly? Should I open with a greeting or with music?" Melissa answered every one, though sometimes she knew he already had his own answers. He didn't need her advice as much as he needed a loyal audience who believed in him without hesitation. And Melissa gave him that, completely. By the day before the party, everything was nearly complete. 20 chairs stood neatly in rows. The stage was draped in dyed fabric. String lights glowed brightly overhead. A hand-painted sign, "The Carter Stage," gleamed under the sunset. On a long wooden table sat the birthday cake, decorated with tiny silver stars Ethan had cut out himself. The air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, mingled with the sweetness of baked cookies. Melissa looked around and felt hope bloom inside her chest. She imagined her family arriving, her father smiling warmly, her mother sitting stiff with crossed arms but unable to hide her surprise, the other grandchildren falling silent before Ethan's talent. In her mind, this time would be different. This time they would have to acknowledge her son. Ethan, meanwhile, stood quietly in front of the stage, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the sign one last time. He whispered, almost like a prayer, "I just want Grandpa to be proud of me, Mom. Just once." Melissa nodded, swallowing hard. In that moment, she believed with everything in her that all the pain of the past, the contempt, the dismissals, the years of being told she and her son weren't good enough, would vanish the second the lights came on, and Ethan stepped forward to greet his audience. She didn't know that just hours later, all of that hope would be crushed by a single, cold text message. On the morning of the birthday party, the Portland sun rose early, spilling soft golden light across the backyard. Melissa woke to the faint aroma of coffee and the sound of Ethan's footsteps. He had been up since before dawn, adjusting the string lights one last time, polishing each chair until it gleamed, even tying little sprigs of lavender to the armrests. The entire yard seemed to tremble with anticipation. Melissa looked at her son, his T-shirt soaked with sweat, hair sticking up in wild tufts, but his face glowing with excitement. In her chest swelled a strange, unshakable belief. Today would be the day Ethan was finally recognized. Today, at least once in his life, he would be seen. But then, everything shattered with a single, sharp ping. Her phone buzzed. Melissa picked it up absent-mindedly, never expecting that one text message could collapse all the joy that had been building. The message was from David, her older brother, the one who always made the final decisions in the family. "We moved the party to the country club. Adults only. Don't come." No punctuation. No apology. No explanation. Just 12 words, cold as a blade. Melissa froze, staring at the screen. She read it once, twice. A third time. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. She tried to convince herself it was a mistake, maybe even a cruel joke. But when she called back, David's voice came through steady, casual, as if they were discussing groceries. "Yeah, we changed the plan. The club's more convenient. And honestly, it's not really appropriate for Ethan to be doing all this. Dad deserves a proper party, not some kid's backyard stage." Melissa bit her lip until she tasted blood, but forced her voice to stay steady. "David, my son has been working nonstop for 4 days. He built a stage. He planned this for Dad. You can't just throw it away." There was a pause. Then David answered, flat and merciless, "Is 16. He'll get over it. Don't make this a big deal." The phone slipped in Melissa's trembling hand. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She turned and saw Ethan standing right there. He hadn't heard every word, but his eyes had already caught the glowing screen, the message that still blazed across it. In that moment, Melissa wished she could shield him from every ounce of pain, but Ethan had seen enough. He looked at her, then at the finished stage, his lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. At last, he whispered, so softly it almost disappeared into the morning air, "Guess I'll just burn it." Melissa's stomach dropped. Not because of the reckless words, but because she understood. He wasn't talking about burning wood or lights. He was talking about burning his dream, the dream his own family had crushed without hesitation. Struggling to stay calm, Melissa tried her mother's number. When the line connected, her mother's voice floated through, light and careless, as if nothing had happened. "Honey, don't overreact. The club is safer. Who lets a child cater for 20 people? We don't want anyone getting food poisoning." Food poisoning. Melissa choked. He's not a toddler. He planned, he cleaned, he prepared everything. Can't you see how hard he's worked? Her mother sighed, dismissive. "Well, it's cute. But it's not real hosting. A restaurant is better." Melissa ended the call before the scream ripped out of her throat. Her hands shook violently. Out in the yard, Ethan sank into a wooden chair, face buried in his hands. His shoulders trembled, but he didn't cry. Instead, his face hardened, like a soldier who had lost a battle, humiliated and aching. Melissa knew then this was only the beginning. The conflict would not stop with one text. It would spread like oil on water, tearing apart the party Ethan had poured his entire heart into. And for the first time in years, something fierce surged inside her chest. Anger. Not anger for herself, but for her son. Melissa couldn't remember how long she stood frozen after hanging up on her mother. All she knew was the heaviness in her chest and the trembling in her hands, as if she'd just touched an open flame. When she finally lifted her head, Ethan was still there, sitting on the wooden chair in the backyard, facing the little stage he had poured every ounce of himself into. He was silent. His narrow shoulders shook, his hands locked together so tightly they turned pale. Melissa slowly walked over and sat down beside him. She wanted to pull him close, to whisper something that might lift him out of the darkness. But Ethan raised his head, eyes bloodshot, wary, cutting off every word she had prepared. "Mum, they don't want me. Not the stage, not the play, not me." His voice was hoarse, cracked, like glass breaking under pressure. Melissa felt her whole body turn to stone. She had braced herself for his disappointment, but nothing could have prepared her to hear her 16-year-old son talk about himself with such raw bitterness. "I tried, Mom. I did everything. I didn't sleep. I worked so hard, but they still think I'm a joke." Ethan buried his face in his hands, his voice fractured and strangled. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I should stop. Maybe I'll never be enough." Melissa drew in a long breath, fighting to stay composed, though inside, rage surged like a rising tide. She wanted to scream at her family, to brand them as the ones who should feel shame. But she knew this wasn't the time to unleash her fury. This was the moment to hold her son together, to stop him from believing the poison they had planted. "Ethan," she whispered, reaching for his hand. But he pulled away, his fingers cold, trembling. Then he stood, moving toward the stage. His eyes swept over the string lights, the fabric backdrops, the wooden planks, all the pieces of himself hammered into place with hope. He murmured, almost to himself, "Guess I'll just tear it down or burn it. Doesn't matter." Melissa's heart seized. She shot up to her feet. "No, don't you dare. This stage is you. It's your heart, your dream. Don't let them take that away." Ethan let out a laugh, but it was warped, soaked in despair. "Dreams don't pay rent, Mom. Dreams just make people laugh at us." Melissa had never seen him like this, broken yet strangely cold, drained of all light. His eyes, once bright with fire, now stared hollow and empty, and the sight of it hurt more than any insult she had ever endured. The backyard fell into silence. White chairs stretched long shadows under the noon sun. The hanging lights swayed gently in the breeze, waiting to be lit. All of it stood as mute witnesses to a family tragedy unraveling. Melissa climbed onto the stage, standing directly in front of her son. She wanted to shake him, to scream until he heard her. Instead, her voice came out low, trembling, yet unwavering. "You might not believe in yourself right now, but I do, and I won't let them take this from you. Not again." Ethan looked at her, lips pressed tight, then turned away. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped down from the stage and walked straight into the house, leaving Melissa standing there, alone, in the center of the dream he had abandoned. She looked around. Everything was still there, the banner that read, "The Carter Stage," the neat rows of chairs, the backdrop fabric fluttering like a wounded flag. But the one thing missing, the only thing that mattered, was the belief in her son's eyes. Melissa clenched her fists. Inside her, a flame ignited. She knew what she had to do. If her family refused to show up, if they wanted to bury Ethan's dream, then she would do the opposite. She would save it. Even if she had to burn through every silence that had kept her chained all these years. Melissa stayed on the stage long after Ethan had gone inside. The early afternoon sun washed the backdrop fabric in a soft orange glow, but in her chest it felt like a storm was gathering. For the first time in years, she felt no fear of being dismissed, no dread of being looked down on. What rose inside her instead was fire. A fire strong enough to burn away the silence that had bound her since she was a little girl dismissed in her own family. She stepped down from the stage and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled, but not from weakness this time. Melissa opened her contacts list, staring at names she rarely called. A fellow teacher from school, an old friend from her book club, a few kind neighbors who once borrowed her outdoor outlet to plug in their Christmas lights. She took a deep breath and pressed call. Her voice no longer stumbled. It was firm, urgent, but sincere. Hi, this is Melissa. My son spent the entire week building a stage to celebrate his grandfather's birthday, but our family abandoned him. He prepared for 23 guests, and now no one is coming. I need help. I need an audience. I need people willing to sit down and see him. There was silence on the other end. Then, unexpectedly, responses began to flow in. I'll be there. Send me the address. I'll bring dessert. Melissa could hardly believe what she was hearing. She typed quickly now, this time into the neighborhood group chat, Backyard Broadway. Tonight, free seats, free food. A 16-year-old boy built it all with his own hands. He deserves an audience. Within minutes, her phone buzzed nonstop. Each new message sent her heartbeat racing faster. An hour later, the first car pulled up. It was the Millers, the couple from the corner house. They stepped out carrying a cheap bottle of wine and wearing shy smiles. We heard you needed guests. We couldn't miss it, they said. Then came two more cars. A music teacher colleague brought her violin, grinning. If you need, I can play the opening notes. Another single mom arrived with her two young children, arms full of fresh yellow daisies from the market. And so it went. More and more people came. Melissa greeted each one, her heart swelling to the point of bursting. The once quiet backyard began to transform into a small town square, alive with chatter, the scrape of chairs across the lawn, the mingling scents of food people had carried in, blending with the lavender that grew along her fence. Inside the house, Ethan still hadn't come out. His light glowed faintly through the upstairs window. A flicker of worry gnawed at Melissa. Would he believe this? Would he find the courage to step out after being so brutally rejected by his own family? But deep down, she knew she had done the right thing. Even if Ethan hadn't seen it yet, a community had come together to fill the emptiness his relatives had left behind. She walked to his door, knocked softly, and spoke through the crack. Ethan, you have guests. They're not the ones you expected. But they're the ones who chose to be here. For you, and your stage, it's waiting. Inside, silence stretched. Then, slow footsteps approached. The door creaked open, revealing Ethan's tear-reddened eyes. He looked at his mother, then passed her toward the window, where the string lights were beginning to glow, and strangers were settling into their seats like a real audience. Mom, they actually came, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. Melissa nodded, her eyes shining yet steady. Yes, son, you built a stage, and tonight it will shine. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes still swollen from crying, his hand gripping the doorknob, as if letting go would mean the whole world outside might swallow him whole. Melissa looked at her son and saw the battle raging in his gaze. Fear, confusion, but also a desperate longing to believe that his dreams still mattered. I don't think I can do this, Mom, Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. Melissa laid her warm hand firmly on his shoulder, guiding his eyes to meet hers. You already did. You built something incredible. Now all that's left is to step out there and show them who you are. Her words came slow, steady, like a vow she could never take back. Outside, laughter rippled through the yard. Someone tuned a violin, letting a teasing melody float into the air. Children dashed in circles beneath the string lights, their squeals bubbling into the summer dusk. The rows of white chairs, meant for family, were now filling with neighbors, colleagues, and even strangers who had heard the story and decided to come. Ethan swallowed hard, then slowly pushed the door wider. He stepped out, his worn sneakers squeaking against the patio tiles. The crowd turned as one, and silence swept over the backyard. There he stood, a skinny teenager, hair messy, t-shirt streaked with sawdust, facing a stage he had built with his own two hands. Somehow the sight alone was enough to make them clap. The applause broke out, sudden, full, rolling like a wave across the lawn. Ethan flinched at first, instinctively stepping back, but Melissa nudged his shoulder gently. They're not laughing at you, Ethan. They're waiting for you. He drew in a shaky breath. Then, slowly, he stepped onto the stage. The glow of the string lights caught his face, turning his eyes into glistening pools. He blinked, scanning the crowd, every seat filled, others leaning against the fence with cups of lemonade in hand, smiling warmly back at him. It wasn't the audience he had imagined, but it was proof. His dream had found people willing to receive it. Hi, everyone? Ethan began, his voice barely above a whisper. It was so soft Melissa could barely hear. From the front row, someone called out, louder, "Kid, we want to hear you!" The crowd laughed, not cruelly, but with encouragement. Ethan's lips tugged into a shy, crooked smile. He steadied himself. Welcome to the Carter stage. I originally prepared this play for my grandfather's birthday, but his throat caught. But maybe tonight, it's for all of you. He gestured to the side, and two of his friends stepped forward. The first scene began. In an instant, the backyard transformed into a makeshift Broadway. The painted sheets rippled like curtains, the string lights glittered like stars, and Ethan, 16 years old, dream burning in his chest, directed every line, every cue. At first, the audience clapped politely, but as the story unfolded, they leaned in, drawn closer, until they were swept into it. A simple play about friendship, faith, and the courage to stand tall when others try to dismiss you. Every scene mirrored Ethan's own journey, and Melissa, watching from the side, felt her chest ache with pride and tears. When the play reached its peak, the lead character shouted, "I am not invisible!" And the crowd erupted, clapping and cheering so loudly it shook the little yard. Their applause mingled with the Portland summer night, becoming a song Melissa knew her son would carry forever. When the final scene ended, the audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered, whistles rang, cheers spilled into the air. Ethan stood in the center of his stage, his hands trembling, his eyes wet. And then, he smiled. Not the brittle, broken smile he wore to hide his pain, but a true, radiant smile. The smile of someone finally seen. Melissa wiped her tears quietly. She knew this was more than a performance. This was a declaration that her son, his dream, and this tiny backyard stage were alive. The echo of applause still lingered in the air as Ethan bowed one final time. His face glowed beneath the string lights, though his hands still trembled with adrenaline. Melissa stood behind the rows of chairs, her heart pounding, her eyes wet. She knew her son had just conquered the hardest thing of all, his fear that he was nothing more than a joke in other people's eyes. But the night wasn't over. In truth, it was only just beginning. A woman from the second row rose and stepped forward. Melissa recognized her, Claire, the lifestyle columnist from the local paper, who had only come out of curiosity after hearing about the event from a friend. She lifted a small camera in her hand and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Do you realize what you just did? You showed me something I almost never see on stage, absolute honesty. I've sat through hundreds of performances, but tonight, in this backyard, I saw the heart of a true director." The crowd burst into applause again. Ethan froze, his eyes wide, as if the words couldn't possibly be meant for him. Melissa whispered under her breath, "That's right, son. Finally, someone sees you." Claire stepped onto the stage, extending her hand. "Would you mind if I wrote a piece about this performance?" Ethan hesitated, glancing back at his mother. Melissa smiled and nodded. "Why, yes, ma'am. I'd be honored," he said, his voice shaky but clear. The reporter began snapping photos. The hand-painted backdrops, the rows of crowded plastic chairs, the radiant smile of a 16-year-old boy with sawdust still clinging to his shirt. Each click of the shutter was proof this night was real. Not just a dream living only inside Ethan's head. Then the audience swarmed him, one by one offering handshakes, praise, even hugs. An old man with a silver beard, a neighbor from down the block, rasped, "Kid, you reminded me of the first time I saw Broadway in New York. But tonight, maybe it was even better. Because here, I saw a boy who didn't give up." Melissa watched as Ethan laughed. A clear, unbroken laugh she thought she'd lost earlier that day. Someone else pressed a card into his hand. "I run the local theater club. If you're interested, come audition. I think you've got a lot the world needs to hear." Ethan held the card, his eyes shining. He turned to his mother and whispered, "Mom, they actually want me. They're not laughing at me." Melissa pulled him into a tight embrace, the weight in her chest finally lifting. "See? Your dream is worth so much more than they ever said." Under the golden glow of the lights, the little play turned into a festival. Someone brought out more pastries. Another poured fresh lemonade. Lauder rose, mingling with the faint notes of a violin drifting into the night breeze. What had once been just an ordinary backyard now pulsed like a living theater, a place where a community came together. Not because of bloodlines, but because of shared humanity. Ethan stood in the center of it all, taller somehow, steadier. Melissa watched her son and, for the first time, no longer feared what her wealthy relatives might say about his worth. They could turn their backs, they could scoff, they could vanish into the polished rooms of their country club. But here, in this small backyard, Ethan had found his true audience, and that was the kind of recognition Melissa herself had never received from her own family. Now, her son had it, completely, undeniably. The show had ended, but the echoes remained. The plastic chairs still carried the warmth of the crowd, the scent of pastries mingled with fresh, cut wood, and the violin whispered faintly from the corner of the yard. Ethan stood in the middle of a circle of congratulations, his cheeks flushed, his smile stretched so wide it surprised even Melissa. He had just lived through one of the most defining moments of his young life. A small victory, but one that thundered. Melissa thought the night might close there, wrapped in relief and pride. But life rarely allows peace to linger too long. As the first guests began to leave, headlights cut across the fence. Melissa squinted toward the street. A gleaming SUV rolled to a stop. The door swung open, and stepping out were none other than her parents, Ethan's grandparents, alongside David, her brother. For a heartbeat, Melissa froze. A chill ran down her spine. She had always known they would react, but not this quickly. The three of them entered the yard, faces hardened, as if they had just come from a courtroom. Her mother crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as glass. Her father gripped the handle of his cane, not for support, but as a scepter of authority. And David, still in a suit with his tie loosened from some grand party, glanced around with open disdain. "Melissa," her father growled, skipping any pleasantries, "do you have any idea what you've done? The family is becoming a laughingstock. People are saying we've been smeared all over the internet." Melissa crossed her arms, unmoving. "I didn't smear anyone. Ethan built this stage. I only invited people decent enough to sit down and recognize it." "Decent enough?" Her mother scoffed, laughter laced with venom. "You mean neighbors? Strangers? People who know nothing about family standards?" David stepped forward, pointing a finger at her. "You need to fix this. Tell that reporter it was all a misunderstanding, that Ethan was just fooling around, not replacing the family with a party. Shut the story down, or," he paused, weighing the words, then lowered his voice, "or Mom and Dad will never forgive you." Melissa's breath quickened. She glanced at Ethan. He had just stepped off the stage, smile still lingering, but now his face had drained of color. He stood still, fists clenched tight. "Stop," Melissa said, her voice low but so firm it startled even her. "Don't drag him into this. If anyone takes responsibility, it's me. I invited these people. I allowed the truth to be seen." "The truth." Her mother snapped back, her tone sharp as a whip. "Do you even realize you're destroying this family's reputation? You've made us villains in some cheap little play." Ethan took a step forward, planting himself between his mother and grandparents. His voice trembled, but his words cut clear. "It wasn't a play. It was my life, and you erased me." The air froze. Melissa looked at her son and saw not only fear and pain in his eyes, but strength. David moved as if to argue, but Melissa raised her hand sharply to stop him. "Enough. You didn't come here to celebrate. You didn't come to apologize. You came to protect a hollow reputation. But that reputation," she exhaled, steady as stone. "My son and I don't need it anymore." Silence. Only the faint rustle of string lights swaying in the night breeze. Her mother's lips parted, trembling with rage. "You'll regret this, Melissa, for the rest of your life." Melissa locked eyes with her, unblinking. Maybe. But at least tonight, I didn't let my son regret one more second. The air in the backyard thickened, as if everyone were holding their breath, waiting for an explosion. The guests who lingered after the show began to slowly step back, but none of them left entirely. They formed a loose outer circle, eyes fixed on the unfolding storm, unwilling witnesses to a family battle that could no longer be avoided. David was the first to break the silence. He tilted his chin, voice dripping with mockery. Ridiculous. A kid nails together some rotting planks, strings up a few cheap lights, and suddenly you want to call it real theater. Melissa, you're turning this family into a joke. Melissa didn't flinch. She folded her arms, her eyes ice cold. A joke is leaving a 16-year-old to work 4 days straight without eating or sleeping. A joke is firing off a one-line text and then sitting at your country club, applauding your own selfishness. Her mother stepped forward, her face drawn tight. Melissa, you are being insolent. We raised you. We gave you food, schooling, a life. And now you dare humiliate us in front of the neighbors. Her mother's voice rang sharp, but it couldn't drown out the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. Someone whispered just loud enough. What kind of grandparents abandon their grandson on his birthday? The words made Melissa's mother flinch, though she quickly pretended not to hear. That was when Ethan stepped forward, placing himself squarely in front of his mother. His face was still young, but his eyes had shed all fear. He looked straight at his grandparents, then at David, and spoke with the weight of a hammer striking steel. You erased me. You erased everything I built. But tonight people saw me. They saw what you refused to see. David let out a short, cruel laugh. Listen to my nephew. Melissa, do you hear him? He's learning how to play the victim, just like you used to. The words stung like a slap across Melissa's face. She stepped closer, confronting her brother head-on. No, David, I was never a victim. And neither is my son. We simply stopped being silent. Maybe that's what bothers you, that the truth isn't buried anymore. Their father, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. His voice was gravelly, trembling at the edges. Melissa, you need to think of the family's honor. After this, how will we hold our heads up in church, at the club? Melissa spun toward him, her eyes blazing like twin blades. Honor? What honor? The kind built on shaming your own grandson. The kind that demands silence just to keep up appearances. If that's what passes for honor in this family, I don't want it. The words slammed into the stillness of the yard. Her mother's face drained of color, her hands shaking with rage. You'll regret this. One day, when everyone turns their back, you'll realize family is all you have left. Ethan lifted his chin, his voice cutting clean through the air. No, Grandma, family isn't the people who leave you behind. Family is the ones who show up. The declaration cracked the silence open. Guests erupted into applause. Some even whistled, as though they had just witnessed the climax of a Broadway play. David flushed red, ready to snap back, but Melissa cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. Enough. I don't want to hear another word. From this moment on, my son and I have nothing to do with what you call family. Keep your country club. Keep your hollow reputation. We'll keep the truth. Her mother stood frozen. Her father faltered, eyes glistening but lips locked. David ground his teeth, then turned and stormed off. The SUV doors slammed shut, echoing like the end of a verdict. And just like that, the night air shifted. The weight pressing down on Melissa's shoulders lifted, replaced by something lighter, freer. Ethan turned to his mother, tears brimming. Melissa took his hand, squeezed it tight, and whispered, "We're free now." When the sleek SUV disappeared down the narrow alley, its taillights swallowed by the dark, the Carter backyard sank into an uncanny silence. Melissa stood frozen, her hand still clasping her son's, feeling as if she had just stepped out of a storm. Around them, neighbors and friends lingered. They didn't clap anymore, didn't cheer anymore. They simply stood, quiet, unshaken, like a living wall of protection, proof that Melissa and Ethan were not alone. One neighbor stepped forward, placing a hand on Melissa's shoulder. You did the right thing. Blood doesn't always mean family. Melissa's throat tightened. She could only nod in thanks. Ethan kept staring at the empty space where the SUV had vanished. No tears glistened in his eyes anymore. Instead, there was a new light, the kind born from bitter truth, and the strength to finally stand tall. That night, after the last guest left, Melissa stacked the leftover chairs. Ethan sat on the edge of the makeshift stage, holding the sign, the Carter stage. Melissa feared he might sink back into silence, but then he looked up and gave her a wary smile. "Mom, thank you for not leaving me." She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of fresh wood and sweat still clinging to his shirt. "I never intended to, and I never will." What Melissa didn't know was that outside their little backyard, another fire had already been lit. The next morning, her phone buzzed with dozens of messages. Friends, coworkers, even strangers had sent her the same link, a brand new article on the front page of the Portland Daily. The headline read in bold, "The Backyard Broadway, a 16-year-old abandoned by family builds a stage and finds a real audience." The byline was Claire's, the reporter from the night before. She wrote about Ethan's meticulous preparation, the joy on his face when he was finally seen. She never named the relatives, but readers didn't need names to understand. Comments poured in. "This kid is braver at 16 than most adults ever will be. Any family that abandons a dream like his doesn't deserve the word family. Does anyone know how to reach him? I want to see his next show." Melissa's vision blurred as she read. Ethan sat beside her, caught between disbelief and awe. He whispered, "People actually care." Her phone buzzed again. This time, an email from an unfamiliar name, a director at the community theater downtown. "Would like to invite Ethan to visit the theater and audition for our upcoming project. A young talent like this should not be wasted." Ethan's hands shook as he read, his lips trembling. "Mom, is this real?" Melissa smiled through tears and wrapped her arms around him. "It's real, Ethan. And this is only the beginning." In that moment, she understood yesterday's pain had become tomorrow's fuel. Her family may have turned their backs, but an entire community had opened its arms. And sometimes, justice doesn't need a courtroom. Justice comes through the eyes that finally believe in you, and through the ripple of a story that refuses to be silenced. A week after that backyard night exploded like a miniature Broadway, life inside the little Portland house found a new rhythm. Ethan spent more time writing scripts, sketching sets, and every time he mentioned the upcoming audition at the community theater, his eyes lit up. Melissa watched the confidence return in every gesture, every smile. It felt like she had been handed a second chance at motherhood, a chance to get it right, to guard her son's dream from the very beginning. That evening, as the two of them sat on the porch, Melissa leaned back, her eyes tracing the string lights still hanging across the makeshift stage. The wind nudged them gently, their glow shimmering like tiny stars. She drew in a long breath, then spoke, not just for Ethan, but for anyone willing to listen. "You know, Ethan, it took me years to learn this. Family isn't just the people who share your blood. Family is the ones who choose to stay, even when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes, to find your real family, you have to cut loose the ties that only make you smaller." Ethan stayed quiet, turning a pencil between his fingers, then gave a small nod. "Mom, I think I get it now. I used to believe that if Grandma, if Uncle David, accepted me, then I'd finally matter. But that night, when people clapped, when they called me a director, I knew I didn't need them to see me." Melissa smiled through tears. "That's right. You don't need anyone's permission to exist. You don't need anyone's approval to dream." She paused, her voice slowing, as if she were speaking straight into the heart of anyone who might hear this story. All of us have been underestimated at some point. Sometimes at work, sometimes in our own families. People will tell you you're foolish, naive, not good enough. And the easiest thing is to believe them, to fold yourself down to fit the mold they built. But Ethan's lesson is this: don't let anyone else define your worth. If one door slams shut, build your own stage. If one dinner table leaves you out, create another table with people who actually want to be there. Ethan lifted his head and grinned. Build your own stage. Melissa laughed softly, brushing away her tears. Exactly. Build your own stage. The porch light bathed them in a warm glow, reflecting their smiles. This wasn't just the end of one ruined performance. It was the beginning of a much longer journey. A journey where Ethan would carry with him the unshakable truth that he was worthy, no matter who had ever said otherwise. And Melissa knew that lesson wasn't only for her son. It was for anyone listening now. So if you've ever been rejected, belittled, or left behind in the very moment you needed someone most, remember this: you don't need them to shine. You just need an audience that sees you. And sometimes, that audience will be complete strangers. Strangers who choose to stay,